Hello guys and welcome back. This is Mr. Siege. Now today I want to make a video about inscriptions. Now which are the best inscriptions for each slot, and that's your scroll, instrument, your emblem and obviously your flag as well. These different slots available to you in every formation. But for now, specifically, I want to talk about V formation. Now, I have many questions from loads of people about which is the best inscription for each slot. And I'm not going to just give you the best or what I think is the best inscription for each slot, but I'm going to give you the top 5 inscriptions that you might want to work on. So obviously here I've got a couple of legendary inscriptions, only 2. I would avoid one. I say avoid one, and we'll get onto that in a minute. So I have done a video on inscriptions before. I basically went through every single inscription and said what's good and what's not, but I've not actually listed them in order of your priority inscriptions. So obviously I was actually contacted by Shappy Gaming a couple of days ago, and he was like, which are the best inscriptions for, I think it was the instrument and emblem, and I gave him just a picture with a few different choices of which I would go for. Obviously if Shappy's got that question, and I know there's a lot of new Siege players or people want to invest in a Siege march, they will surely have the same question too. In fact, a guy messaged me today about the same sort of thing. So let's go and have a look and let's get down to it and decide which are the best for each slot. Now, I didn't just come up with this totally myself. I did contact a couple of the people in the Siege group. I said, what are your thoughts on this? Do you agree, or would you change anything? And there was a few things that people said they would change, and I'm going to go through those as well. So there will be like a few honorable mentions, which I think are good also. Now, just to bear in mind, I'm doing this video specifically for your Garja Cordoba or your Cordoba Garja march. And either way round, they are good. Garja will let that march last longer, and it's really preferability. So just go and give it a go. But let's start off with the Chronicles of the Dragon, which is obviously the scroll. And number 1 in this slot has to be Sharpshooter. Now, there's a few people that question Sharpshooter, and that's because, as you can see in the description here, it has a 10% chance to spend 50 rage. And obviously you're losing rage, and you don't want to lose rage, especially as a ranged march, because rage is kind of hard to generate as a ranged march. Up to the first skill cycle is kind of slow, so it takes ages to get that first skill cycle off, and the reason for that is you're not generating as much rage because you're not being hit by the enemy directly. You're only doing range attacks to the enemy, ranged basic attacks to the enemy, and not receiving any ranged basic attacks or any basic attacks at all. But what Sharpshooter does do fantastically is give you a 5% boost to ranged normal damage, and that's a 5% all damage boost for your Garja Cordoba march. Yeah, I do have a 10% chance to lose that 50 rage, but you do increase the damage of that basic attack by 50%. And apparently it is a 50% damage boost, but just to that basic attack. So it's not huge, guys, and it won't be on your skill damage or anything like that. So it's not amazing, that part of this inscription, but the first part is just as good as the greatest glory for a siege march. So it's kind of a decent inscription and the best for its slot. Now, second on this, I'm not going to go for full draw. I think I'll go for onslaught, which deals 1.5% normal damage of all types, which is a 1.5% all damage boost again for your Garja Cordoba march. It does what it says on the tin. It gives you 1.5% more normal damage, so that's pretty decent. And third, I will go for now for full draw. So full draw to me is kind of like half a Ring of Doom. Your Ring of Doom has 10% chance to trigger a 50% all damage bonus for 2 seconds. At least that's what I believe. Now, obviously this is 25%, and it does cost you 50 rage. Again, you're losing rage, but you are getting this 25% bonus to range normal damage for 2 seconds, which could land on your active skill. So on a positive note, there's a possibility that you could be boosting your active skill there on your Garja Cordoba march, and 25% will do a lot of damage, to be fair. So number 4 on this list, I'm going to go for Valiant, and that's 1% extra damage. Again, not quite as good as Onslaught. I know it says 1.5% more normal damage, but Valiant is obviously 1% all damage, which will equate to the same as normal damage anyway, plus your skill damage, and 1% extra damage covers everything. Now, the fifth one was kind of awkward because Ward is fantastic. Every time you use an active skill, their troop takes 5% less damage 3 seconds. But I'm actually going to go for Tremors. So whenever Wielder's troop uses an active skill, it has 30% chance to deal extra direct damage, which is ranged direct damage, to all targets hit by the skill. So that's 3 hit by Cordoba, not every time, but 30% of the time. And that's just going to keep adding the damage on the field. And I believe, for me, that would land in number 5. But Ward is very good. And if that was 5% more damage dealt for 3 seconds, then I would say 100%. But as a range march, you're only receiving damage by ranged counterattack. You're not receiving damage from skill damage unless you're getting swarmed, and by then it's kind of too late anyway. So that's kind of why I've not put that in the top 5. But that definitely gets an honourable mention. And another great one, I think, is Furious for your skill damage commander, wherever Furious is, here. That's great for a skill damage commander, you know, like your Margaret, your Baba, Stephen, and John. Another great one would be Breaker, and that's going to help everybody out, but it has a 10% chance to reduce a target's defense by 15% for 3 seconds. Now that is very, very useful, and if you do have it, then it's quite a good one to work on. But inevitably, if you guys are going to get Autarchs and KVK, you can all get your hands on Sharpshooter if you want to provide that inscription on your ranged march. Now let's go across to the Imperial War Drum. Now this one's a lot easier. So obviously we've got Drilled, which is by far the best. You've got no downsides to this inscription. The Wielder's troop gains 5% boost to range normal damage dealt. That's the same as the Greatest Glory. When attacking from range, for every 20% units a target is lost, the Wielder's troop, we also gain 3% bonus to range normal damage dealt, up to a maximum of 12%. So if they've lost 80% of their units, you're going to be doing 17% more all damage to the target, which is absolutely crazy. And if you're targeting weak troops, Drilled is going to drill your opponents totally. So fantastic inscription there. At last, this is by far the best we've seen so far, although there is one that could give it a run for its money, and that's in the Imperial Decree, which we'll get onto. Now, number 2 in this one actually would be Bloody Bolt. The Wielder's troop gains 2% boost to range normal damage dealt, that's 2% all damage, and whilst in range mode, the troop deals 5% more range normal damage to enemy troops with less than 50% units remaining. So again, if you're targeting weaker troops, you're going to be doing more damage. So you could be doing a total of 7% more damage there, and that's a fantastic inscription, to be fair, guys. So number 3 on this list will be Uplifting. So when the troop enters battle, you're going to be gaining 1% bonus to all types of normal damage dealt, which is obviously 1% all damage again. And every 10 seconds after the start of the battle, the troop's also going to gain 1% bonus to all types of normal damage dealt, up to 5%. So I believe then you could be getting 6% all damage, which is great too, but that requires you to stay in contact with the target, which is what you want to be doing anyway. You want to try and get into a position where you're going to be firing constantly and not breaking that rage cycle, which will then obviously take longer to regenerate again afterwards. So there's Uplifting, rank 3. Now number 4, I would go for War Hunger, which again 1.5% more normal damage for all types. It's similar to what we spoke to on the last one, which is Onslaught, same sort of thing, but we have got some better inscriptions in this slot, to be honest with you. And finally, I think for number 5 on this, I would go for Fearsome, which is 1% more extra damage, 1% extra damage, which is all damage again, and all damage is basically the best thing you can get in these inscriptions, in my opinion. Now, I'm going to mention some honourable mentions here, and Evasive is good, so that's a little bit like the Delayed Amulet. You do take 2.5% less counterattack damage of all types. Devious is also good for your skill damage commanders, so if you do have skill damage commanders, then you can use obviously Devious too, which isn't too bad. Apart from that, many of these aren't that great. A lot of them are 10% with cooldowns and not that fantastic, and again losing rage and stuff like that. So those are my top 5 for the Imperial War Drum. Now we'll move on to the Dragon Standard, the flag. The Dragon Standard is a really interesting one because the inscription on this, I feel you've got 2 inscriptions which are supposed to be the best in slot, They really don't seem to be. And some people think Merciless is great, and people like me, I just don't think it cuts it, to be honest with you. So, for me, number one in the Dragon Standard is Ballistics. And whilst in V formation, which you're going to be, or you should be, and in ranged mode, obviously, you're going to be running this in range mode, you're going to deal 3% more damage, and 3% more damage is absolutely huge compared to all the other inscriptions we've seen, apart from obviously the rare and legendary inscriptions. But compared to Merciless, you get 30% attack for 10 seconds once you've entered battle. Now, as I was saying to you, the way ranged commanders work and V formation operates in terms of generating rage is the first 10 seconds or so is very, very slow in generating that rage to the active skill. So there's a very, very high chance that this 30% attack doesn't even activate when you cast your active skill, and it's kind of wasted. So the first part of this skill, increased skill damage resistance of the wielder's troop by 5%, that's pointless unless you're getting swarmed, and again, by that time, does it really matter how much skill damage you're taking? You're gone anyway. You're off the field. You want to be on the field. That's the main thing. If you're running a Garja Cordoba march and you're in a good position, you're in a proper ball, and you're firing on the target and you're staying in contact, the second part of this skill isn't going to be working after 10 seconds, and that makes me really question how much worth this inscription has. And for your Cordoba march, I'd say very little, because the AoE means you stay in contact a lot more often and you're not breaking that rage cycle. Now, for the other commanders, the single target commanders like Baba and Margaret, or even John, for instance, it could work on your John march. It's just never going to be that OP. Maybe if you're sat at a pass and some troops are just popping in and out of a pass, and you're just popping off for up to 10 seconds, you're never even hitting an active skill, then I guess 30% attack is going to help you. So even for number 2 in this slot, and I'm talking about in the perfect situations where you're going to be constantly fighting, I'm going to have to go for assertive. 2% more damage while on the map. You're going to be on the map, you're not be garrisoning or rallying, really, and for me that's kind of a no-brainer. And for number 3 would be cohesive. Again, you're dealing 2% extra damage to the target when it has over 50% units remaining. That's obviously your troop has 50% remaining, I do believe. Now, you want your march to have 50% units remaining, otherwise you're probably going to be returning to the city because you're not going to be trading that well. So cohesive is almost as good as assertive, but you have got a condition for that 2% damage to actually occur. So I would put that in number 3. Now, number 4, I will stick Merciless because I do think it has potential to be good in the right situations. I wouldn't say it should be top of anyone's list to get, and it's very costly to get. Obviously it costs you that 8 shards, and that takes so much time to actually accumulate. Now, you can convert inscriptions now, so it's not the end of the world if you did get Merciless and you don't like. You can convert to another formation, so it's not the end of the world. And number 5, I'm going to put Striker. Again, same thing as Warhunger and Onslaught, 1.5% more normal damage of all types, almost as good as cohesive. So yeah, that's your top 5 for Dragon Standard. And finally, and this one's a bit easier than the other one again, Astute's the best. 10% boost to range normal damage dealt. This could be the best inscription on V formation as a whole. It's 10% all damage for your Cordoba and Garja March or Garja Cordoba. And yeah, that's all the time, regardless of any conditions. Number 2, again, Sharp Arrows, a 4% boost to range normal damage dealt. So 4% all damage, basically. Again, a very, very strong inscription. Now, what we're looking at here on these is it says 4% boost. Now, a boost is better than a bonus, and that's what Line Shot gives you. It gives you 5% more range normal damage, which it is a bonus, this one is. So Line Shot looks like it's better than Sharp Arrows, but I believe it isn't quite as good. Although 5% more range normal damage, as it says on there, should be very, very good, and that's why it's in number 3. Smite, 2% more normal damage of all types, so 2% more all damage. I think that's a really good inscription. If you do get that, it's worth working on. Only half the value of Sharp Arrows, however, so if you do get that inscription, you should be pretty happy. And number 5, I will actually go for Rapacious on this one, 1.5% extra damage. And obviously Militant is very similar. That's basically the same on your Gauja, Cordova, March, 1.5% all damage. But so either Rapacious or Militant, they're kind of the same on that March. But if you did have a skill damage March, you might as well go for your Rapacious. But yeah, all the others I wouldn't say are that amazing. Now, if you're dealing more counterattack damage of all types, kind of pointless unless, again, you're getting swarmed. You don't want to deal more counterattack damage because you have to be receiving basic attacks to deal that damage. If you're reducing counterattack damage taken, that's not bad. Now, obviously, those are my top 5 inscriptions from each slot. But, you don't have to forget, the basic, defense, attack, health. March speed is also okay, but if you got a full set of legendary gear, I don't think it's actually a necessity. I'd rather take all damage or anything else, really, to be honest with you. So if you do get something like 3.5% health, it's not terrible. I guess that sort of equates to about 1% all damage, something like that. Probably worth checking out one of Bilect's videos. I don't know if you've seen his channel, but he does have a lot of knowledge about your stats and how much each stat equates to on each march. I did watch a video by him, which is really useful. So I'd go check his channel out if you want to know more about the impact of more health on a march or attack on a march. And he did experiments with drum and horns and rings and stuff like that, I believe, too. So guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you find it helpful. This is me, Mr. Siege, and bye-bye.